Blue carbon is part of the toolkit for solving climate change. People will probably be more familiar with the concept of carbon being locked up in trees and soils on land, and in essence blue carbon is exactly the same.
I think that capturing of carbon has been around for quite a long time, but the potential for marine ecosystems, marine habitats to capture carbon from our atmosphere has been less investigated. Policymakers and scientists are starting to realise that actually our oceans have a huge potential to capture that carbon that is being released into the atmosphere. It might actually help us to ameliorate some of those impacts of climate change from the burning of fossil fuels. Different habitats are thought to have different capturing capacities, but there is a lot of pressure on those systems. One of the main global challenges, one of the really big problems that we face is habitat loss, habitat destruction.
If you look at coral reefs, for instance, you're seeing increasing bleaching events. But we can also see this with other habitats as well that are perhaps less iconic, but just as important. We know that salt marsh is disappearing. We know seagrass and mangroves are disappearing. And from a UK perspective, my own personal research perspective, is that we're seeing the loss of kelp forests, which are the equivalent of broadleaf forests on land, and we're seeing these switch from sort of really healthy ecosystems to ones dominated by turf algae that they just don't have the same three-dimensional habitat that supports high levels of diversity.
A whole system is a much better carbon store than a fragmented system. If we think about a tropical system, well, mangroves, seagrasses and coral reefs form a really important connected set of systems. So the mangroves grow on the coastline and they are really highly productive. So the leaf material that comes from those mangroves is exported out of that mangrove system to provide food in other areas. One of the places that goes to is our seagrasses. And our seagrasses, again, provide that really important nursery habitat. We find a high biodiversity of species associated with them. They grow really quickly, and so they lock away that carbon. They then export that productivity into the coral reef, and then we have these really biodiverse systems. They have ecological and economic and social value to all of those ecosystems. They're important for lots of different reasons, but it's that connectivity between them that really enhances that importance.
I think we've reached a tipping point. It's always been a problem that's further down the road. But I think we're at this tipping point where if we don't do something in the next 10 years, it will have devastating impacts. We need to pay more than just lip service to marine protected areas. In terms of individual lifestyle choices, I guess, across the board is probably reducing meat consumption. That isn't to say that everyone should go vegetarian, because I think that would be equally destructive on the environment. But there's a lot of evidence to say reducing meat consumption has a positive effect for our climate. Being political helps with these things. Governments are reluctant to make change because they work on cycles. Politicians can't really think long term, and I think what we're increasingly seeing is businesses who are able to see long term. If you support businesses that have a good ecological outlook, that will encourage more businesses to do that as well, I think.
We have a really important piece of legislation that the government put into place. What that allows us to do is conduct research and inform how we're going to manage those systems and how we can protect and conserve them, and engage local people in conservation of them as well.
There are citizen science projects out there, and I think there's going to be more and more moving forward. If you look up Project Seagrass on the internet, they will talk about opportunities for getting involved. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference as one person, but as 7 billion people it does. I think that we've got to be optimistic that we can turn things around. Otherwise, what's the point?
One of the things that's happening is that fragmentation is pulling apart that connectivity, which essentially means they're not functioning in the way that they need to function. And one of those functioning roles is to support life, including ours.